Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Dr. Steph Sheehan. He's an American scientist and entrepreneur. He has founded, co-founded, and developed core technology for several businesses, including Air Company, Catalytic Innovations, Dreamers, and others. During his academic career, Sheehan has made significant contributions to the development of catalysts for artificial photosynthesis and carbon dioxide conversion. He pioneered a process that transformed carbon dioxide into hydrocarbons, which is utilized in products like vodka, fragrances, and sustainable aviation fuels. His innovative work has been recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30, MIT Technology Review's Innovators Under 35, and has won awards for the United Nations, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and NASA. Dr. Steph, welcome to the Future Space.
Thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Yeah, the technology that I had previously developed turns carbon dioxide into all sorts of hydrocarbons, not just ethanol, into jet fuel, for example, which are a mixture of paraffins and aromatics. In short, I've been doing a lot of chemistry for the energy industry over the last 10 years.
Absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to hear more. But Steph, let's start with, could you share with us 3 words that for you captures the essence of space?
So I've done a little bit of thinking about these. I think exploration is the first one. The second is energy. And the third is innovation.
Did you think that you would be working in technology that you find yourself today?
So I didn't actually. I was actually a firefighter coming out of high school. I took the civil service exam and started down that path, but quickly pivoted because I was getting a small business up and running. And that business did software. It wasn't even anything like what I'm doing today. I really started focusing on energy specifically after I did my PhD, or during and after grad school, because it's really the way that you can make a difference in the world. It's a way that you can have a large impact. In my opinion, a bigger impact than a lot of the small software companies that I was working with previously in my career.
Do you think that we're on the cusp of really changing the world with energy? I mean, if we look at history of our civilization, right, these moments that have redefined the future, these moments where a new energy technology is discovered, whether it's fire, whether it's nuclear. Our world has been riding on this understanding of energy for quite some time. And now that space is becoming a reality, we're going to need a source of energy that is more powerful than what we've had before.
Right now, we're entering into a renaissance in data specifically, where energy is now at a premium. We need more energy than we ever have before for things like artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. And then you also look at the space industry. Using reusable rockets has driven the cost down to get things into outer space, but that the energy cost is still up there. So the hardware costs are coming down, the energy costs are staying the same or increasing, and that means that we're facing a supply and demand issue when it comes to kilowatt hours, when it comes to energy.
So you said in your 3 words, exploration, energy, and innovation. Explain a little bit more how space for you is energy.
Energy is one of the major challenges that you have in space exploration. Where are you going to get your energy from? How are you going to harvest it? How are you going to convert it? And so I think a lot about how do you utilize energy in outer space. That couples together with something that I might have mentioned to you earlier. It's called in situ resource utilization, and that's all the work that I've done with NASA specifically. In situ resource utilization, or ISRU, is taking the elements that you have present, like for example, the Martian atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, utilizing those elements to make products that are needed rather than having to transport them there. And ISRU is driven by energy. You need, of course, the core materials. You need the core elements, which in a lot of cases are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which are available on places like Mars. But you need energy to transform them, and that's the challenge.
So carbon dioxide, you see that as one big source for energy. And one of the product that we are discovering now is in abundance in the universe is also water. Are these technology connected? Can they work for both, or is just the carbon dioxide out of the air and then taking the energy from the water is a total different ballgame?
Well, that's a great question. The energy itself needs to come from somewhere else. Carbon dioxide and water are both very happy, very low energy molecules. And so you need to put in energy to transform them into anything else, really. To make any products from carbon dioxide and water, you need to add a lot of energy, whether that comes from electricity, whether it comes from heat, whether it comes from nuclear energy. There are different ways to utilize the energy itself, the kilowatt hours, to transform different substrates into different products. But you need the energy. There are two things that we get from fossil fuels right now. We get usable carbon, and that's what we use for things like plastics. But probably the most important thing we get from fossil fuels today is the energy. And that's the energy that's sitting in the carbon hydrogen bonds of the fossil fuels. And when we break those carbon hydrogen bonds and reform them into carbon oxygen bonds and carbon dioxide, you get a lot of energy out. So really, it's finding the energy is a separate input in a lot of ways from the water and the carbon dioxide.
The second question that I always ask all my guests, when it comes to space, there is the science story of space. There's the technology story of space. More and more, it's going to be the geopolitics of space. But if I ask you, what is the human story of space? What would you answer?
That's, I think, my first word is exploration, right? We've always wanted to explore and push frontiers to new limits. One of the reasons why we want to go to outer space is exploration, is to expand the human species. Now, the reason why my second two words were energy and innovation, those are the two things that we need to provide in order to explore. So maybe I could have reorganized my words there. The goal is exploration. The inputs are energy and innovation. And those are the things that I've focused on. One thing that I think is really interesting about space, specifically when you think about innovation, is that it's actually a place where we've proven technologies that are vital to our survival here on Earth. My favorite example is solar panels. Solar panels were prohibitively expensive to use as a consumer or put on your rooftop back several decades ago. The only application that made a lot of economic sense for solar panels, or one of the only applications, was on satellites, because your energy is extremely valuable. It's much more valuable on the satellite than it is down here on Earth, where you're competing with something like fossil fuels. But you can't ship your oil up to a satellite. You need to find a way to harvest your own energy on a satellite. And deploying solar panels on satellites actually helped to improve our research and development and drive the cost of solar panels down, so that today you can buy them and put them on your rooftop. From an innovation perspective, commercializing things in outer space actually can help us to make them more effective and make them more widely available here on Earth.
You touched something that I've actually mentioned or talked about, how the incentive in space are forcing you to be innovative and more sustainable. That atom of transformed carbon that you've taken with you, you can't just open the hatch and just discard it because it's garbage. It's so precious that you have to figure out ways to recycle and to keep it with you. As opposed to here on Earth, because the resources are abundant, the incentives are actually the opposite. It's cheaper to just trash things and not be sustainable. Do you see the incentive in space to be much more conducive to be sustainable and to be efficient and to find innovation, right?
You have to. I mean, when you're in a space station, you have to have all of your systems have to be closed loop, whether that's nitrogen in the air, whether that's oxygen in the air, whether that's carbon dioxide. All the elements that you're using, you need to be able to close the loop on them, because getting any replacements to a space station is extremely costly, both money and energy wise. And so it doesn't really make any sense to jettison things or to trash things like we do here on Earth and just take a fresh supply. That really isn't efficient. It's much more efficient in space to recycle or use in situ resource utilization. And not just for carbon, nitrogen, all of kind of like the nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, any products that you make with I would say the core building block elements, and even with some metals, transition metals specifically, you want to be able to reuse, purely because you really can't transport, or it's really prohibitively costly to transport replacements to wherever you are, whether it's space station or on Mars.
Which is one of the big advantages of fossil fuels also, is transportation. It's an energy that is easily movable and you're not losing it. Like even electricity, you can create electricity in one place, but you lose a lot by transporting that energy a long distance. The carbon fuel, you can extract it in one place and you can move it all around without losing anything. So until we find another energy that can check all the boxes that we currently have with fossil fuel, it will be hard to get rid of it.
Well, at least on Earth. In space, it's hard. It makes no sense to transport fossil fuels up to space. In that case, we're in good shape. I mean, on Earth, we're much better at transporting hydrocarbons than we are at transporting electrons. If you look at the energy density of kilojoules that are transported through like a pipeline, for example, like a gas pipeline, there really is no electrical conduit that can match that. We're much more effective at transporting energy as hydrocarbons or as liquid fuels than we are, so as molecules, than we are at transporting energy as electrons, as electricity.
Now, take me back a little bit into your journey prior to chemistry. You shared that you had been a firefighter, your mother is a teacher. Here you are, known for technologies that are absolutely amazing, looking at the air and figuring out that there's energy there and how can you capture it. How did these dots connect with one each other?
I've always wanted to have an impact. If you look at the theme of all the businesses that I've started, all of them started out trying to have the biggest impact on humanity that we could. As you progress through a business, in a lot of cases, you pivot and you keep on moving toward the targets where your technology is most effective or where you're addressing customer requirements most effectively. And that's what I've done. And I've always started out, though, with the bigger picture, with the broader picture, to try to do something that really moves the dial for humanity. That's one of the reasons why I've done a lot of work in the space industry with NASA and a few other groups, that are in the space industry. And the thing that I'm working on now since I left Air Company, is also aligned with that, really to have the biggest impact possible.
Anything that you can share about that new project that you're working on?
Sorry, it's classified.
Well, if it's anything like everything that you've done before, we can't wait. I remember flying over New York City at night and looking at the skyline of Manhattan and trying to imagine the Italian explorer crossing the Atlantic Ocean and arriving at this location with trees everywhere. And if I was to share with them that in 300 years from that day, there would be a city with all these buildings where people with the energy, and I would be on a plane up in the sky, a place where I can sleep, I can eat, and I can go to the bathroom, and I'm taking a picture on this little device that at the same time connects me to anywhere around the world. Not only would he not believe me, but he would send me to the fire witchcraft for something. Standing here today and working on all the different technologies, if you look at that future, what do you think you would like to see in 100, 200, 300 years from now?
It's incredible. I really like the way that you're evoking the image of sailors coming from Europe to America and seeing Manhattan Island or, what became New Amsterdam, right? Which was just a bunch of trees and then maybe a little village and gradually built itself up to be Manhattan and be the city that I'm calling you from right now. I mean, I think that take that same bit of imagination and apply it to the Martian landscape. I think that what we really need to do is think about how we can turn other celestial bodies, whether that's the moon, Mars, and even beyond, into the outpost for humanity where we can really explore, where we can broaden our horizons beyond the planet that we're on today. And I think that that's really one of the ways that humanity can be the most impactful on the universe. Now, I will say that we shouldn't forget the planet that we're on today. It is pretty valuable. We only have one planet right now. There are still a lot of things we have to do here on Earth to make it more hospitable for future generations. But I think that space exploration is something that near and dear to my heart and something that really provokes the imagination of people all around the world.
Do you think that in that picture, nuclear is going to be part of the solution?
Not only a part of the solution, but it's really the only solution. Now I mentioned that when you talk about doing things in situ or in situ resource utilization, you're taking the building blocks, right? You're taking the core elements that you find, and that's on Earth. You could think of things like carbon dioxide, nitrogen gas, oxygen gas, water. On Mars, there's a lot of carbon dioxide and water specifically. Taking those core building blocks and adding energy to them to turn them into something new. Like, for example, taking nitrogen and turning it into ammonia, or taking carbon dioxide and turning that into jet fuel, of course, with water as a proton source in both cases. Or, even taking water and turning it into oxygen, which is a very simple reaction, just splitting water into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. We still need oxygen to breathe. Now, in order to do all of those things, you need a lot of energy. You need the kilowatt hours, you need the energy itself. You have the elements, but you don't have the energy. Nuclear is probably the only way that we're going to be able to supply enough energy in outer space to be able to do a lot of these things that we want to do. Solar has its advantages and disadvantages in space. It's good for small applications, things like data processing, things like surveillance, like satellites. Solar is fine for that, but in order to transform things, in order to do chemical transformations with electricity, you need a lot more energy than you're going to be able to get with solar. You need a much higher energy density. And that's where nuclear comes in. Nuclear really is the only option to be able to power things in outer space, whether you're talking about the moon or Mars, or even in some cases, space stations. Those space stations have a much, much lower energy requirement than like a moon base or a Martian base would. And what's very important is that if you're trying to go from the Earth to Mars, it's really advantageous to have a stopover at the moon because it takes a lot of energy to get out of Earth. And whether or not you're refueling in orbit around the planet or whether you're refueling on the moon, you're going to need energy in order to provide that. You're going to need energy in order to make that fuel. Essentially, the way I see it, nuclear is really the only option to be able to get us from where we are today to transporting significant payloads to places like the moon or especially to Mars.
Now that you've shared your opinion of nuclear, is that a hint on what you're working on right now?
A little, you could say it's a little hint. There's only one way we're going to be able to provide the energy required. Yeah, it's a little hint, but I really can't say anything else. We're building the best energy source on the planet.
Excellent. Do you believe, I mean, we talk about how renewable energy is part of the solution, which I definitely agree, but it will not fuel the next leap of exploration or these big achievements. Do you see a world where energy, low cost energy, will become ubiquitous in the same way that information today, right? If you look back, data, if you look back into the days of the Hearst or where information and data, fortunes were made on it because it was not easily available. Now, data is everywhere. We have too much of it. You could say that it's ubiquitous. Energy used to be scarce. Now it's becoming less and less. Do you see a world where the basic consumption will be done in the background without us knowing that it's not like having a vehicle moving you from point A to point B that is charged by itself without you knowing it?
I think we're always going to have some level of, right? We've always become better at consuming energy. The more energy we make, the better we become at consuming it, right? If we have faster, more efficient vehicles, like people are making supersonic jets, for example. If you have faster, more efficient vehicles, one of the downsides to a supersonic jet is that it consumes about 3.5 times more fuel or 3.5 times more energy per passenger. As we make ourselves more efficient, as we make ourselves faster, as we make ourselves better and stronger, our energy consumption actually only goes up. So people like me who focus on the energy side of things, we have to keep innovating to keep up with humanity's consumption. When I started my last business, I thought the price of energy was going to go down. I thought the price of renewable electrons was actually going to decrease over the course of the next 7 years. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong. The price of electricity is, if anything, gone up. And a large part of that is because of cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence, which I didn't see how big that was going to become from an energy consumption perspective. Now, my prior business did molecular transformations, right? So transforming one small molecule into another small molecule. So that business did not generate energy in any way, shape, or form. It was a consumer of energy. It consumed energy to transform one molecule into another. There are many businesses out there that do that. Right now, just about every oil and gas company in the entire world does that. They consume chemical energy to transform hydrocarbons from fossil fuels into other hydrocarbons from fossil fuels, or to separate them or to purify them. You could think of more like there are some companies or some organizations in the energy industry who handle the small molecules, transform molecules from one thing into another. And there are others that focus on the actual kilowatt hours, the energy. A kilowatt hour is not a molecule. A kilowatt hour is a measurement of energy. So, when you turn on a light, you start consuming kilowatt hours or joules. Those are all units of energy. as you consume those kilowatt hours, it needs to be generated somewhere, or it needs to come from a battery somewhere. That's really the challenge when you think about not just making things in outer space, but also being able to have carbon free or sustainable energy here on Earth.
It reminds me, there was this video podcast from Cleo Abram, huge if it's true. She did this episode about nuclear. Little secret, when I was in my teenage years, I contemplated the idea of going into lobbyist for nuclear energy because I've always felt that we had missed the boat with that energy. It was the solution for the future. It's the cleanest energy for what you get, really, if you look into it. But anyway, I ended up going into a different place. But one of the mistakes that currently our society is doing is we're constantly thinking that when it comes to energy, we have to do less. Right? We have to figure out how to reduce our consumption, when in reality, it is extremely counterintuitive to everything that exists in life and to us species. Like you said, every time that we figure out how to be more efficient with the technology, we actually consume more energy. So the idea should not be how can we do less and try to go back into the past, but how can we do more but better? That's the philosophy that I think fuels your work, but also should be, that's how our society should be looking at, right?
How do we do more but better is a good way to think about it. That being said, there are a lot of, we want to be as energy efficient as possible. We want to use there are a lot of processes that use more energy than they should, really. And so there's a lot of work to be done to improve energy efficiency. But if you have a fundamental step forward, like for example, there is a minimum amount of energy it's going to take to get a rocket into outer space. And you really can't get around that minimum amount of energy. And a lot of this is driven by the second law of thermodynamics, which is that the entropy of the universe is always increasing. We always tend toward disorder, and you can't once you've opened the box, you can't close it again. Really, we're just agents of entropy. We're all acting out the second law of thermodynamics by increasing our energy consumption to make the time that we have on this planet or in outer space more effective.
I've written this piece that says, look, we're about to give basically life its biggest gift in 3.6 billion years because we're continuing that process of entropy beyond the planet. It would be such a waste to develop in complexity for such a long time, to be limited on this tiny speck in the giant universe. Because ultimately, I mean, whether it's today or in a few billion years, this planet will disappear, and all this will either collapse on itself because it hasn't figured out how to move forward, or it has figured out a way to go beyond, and we're that agent. Like you said, we're that agent of entropy.
Again, that being said, I do think that there is. I mean, first off, I'm talking about energy, not molecules. So, with molecules, you really have to recycle them, because that's more of a molecular sustainability. That's more of, you only have so many of these molecules, or you're putting these molecules in the wrong place. Like you're increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere when you shouldn't have carbon there, or having carbon there is going to have catastrophic effects to life. Making sure that you're recycling molecules and using those efficiently in space, that's just ISRU. That's in situ resource utilization. And that's what's necessary for outer space. Producing the energy, which you could do a variety of ways, and I touted the advantages of nuclear, especially for space. The energy, that's the thing that we need to get better at creating more of, because when we do find ways to recycle these molecules in outer space, when we do find ways to recycle hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, you name it, oxygen, all of that requires a lot of energy to do. And the first iteration of it is not going to be very efficient. No matter how hard we try, the first time that we build a habitat on Mars, it's most likely going to be very inefficient in its energy use, because we're going to be focusing on stability. We're going to be focusing on robustness. We're going to be focusing on keeping people alive. We're not going to be focusing on optimizing for every bit of our energy use. And we shouldn't be. In the very first iteration, of a lot of things is very inefficient. And then as you cost optimize and you make things more efficient, you drive down its energy consumption. But version 1.0 isn't going to be the new Amsterdam of Mars. Is not going to be as as efficient with its energy as the fully modern Manhattan. that we see now, and hopefully we'll see in the next few hundred years in the future.
It's the same thing with pretty much any experience or even an expedition for the space station. These beginnings of exploration or these beginnings of technologies are really just about the function and not about really the form. Food, in space, food is purely a source of energy. It's not about the human experience at all. But as we think of imagining a life, that is beyond the planet, that is in space, the human experience is going to have to be much more interesting than people eating dry food or eating something that does not appeal, whatsoever, or even being in an environment that feels more that you're like doing hardcore camping on the top of Everest. It's for some, but it's not for everyone. So what I find interesting now is that space has become a topic that demands to go beyond just the engineering aspect of it. How are we going to be shaping that human experience as we go beyond? And so that it becomes much more interesting for everyone. And we can actually imagine ourselves living out there. Because if it's just a question of function, then it's purely just an engineering perspective to it. And how can we fulfill that equation without any humanity to it?
Yeah, it is an interesting question of function and how you actually deploy these things, because it is, I mean, one of the things that today's space industry has done really well is get the cost of launch down, get the cost of getting a kilogram of stuff into outer space. But the next step is we need to get stuff to Mars. We need to get stuff to the moon, and making sure we do that effectively. That's going to take a lot of resources, but I think it's ultimately worth it. I think it's ultimately where we need to go.
A couple of questions for that energy to leave Earth. You mentioned about nuclear. I don't know the answer. Like, I'm really asking something that I've known nothing about. But is nuclear part of the solution to leave the Earth? So that's one question. And the other question is for the knowledge or for the technology that we're using right now to leave, how important will AI be to help figure out the right mixtures for fuel?
Well, the rockets that we use now use primarily RP-1, which is a kerosene-like rocket propellant. I believe the starships that SpaceX launches, they either use or they're aimed to use liquid methane or cryogenic methane together with cryogenic oxygen. So right now we use, whether it's RP-1, so kerosene, or methalox, so methane. Right now we use hydrocarbons to get ourselves from the surface of the planet to outer space. And I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be using hydrocarbons to do that, because it's very difficult to develop other propulsion technologies. I mean, we're very good at propulsion with hydrocarbons. We're not that good at propulsion with other things. Once you get into space, then you can use other technologies to move about. That being said, making the hydrocarbons, I mean, it's in order to make methane, the Sabatier reaction is really well known. It's carbon dioxide and hydrogen transformed into methane. It was developed in the early 1900s. And so making methane for rocket engines, it could be done using nuclear energy, or could be done using other renewable sources of energy very easily. Right now, it's just cheaper to buy natural gas and make your methane from natural gas. But that's not really a long-term sustainable way to do it. And you can't do that on a place like Mars. Mars, you could use the carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere, produce hydrogen using water that's harvested from regolith, and combine those both in the Sabatier reactor, and then you have your methane that can propel a rocket back to Earth. I actually wrote a paper about that a few years ago. That's one option to utilize the energy that comes from nuclear and existing infrastructure. Another is to deploy it in space on Mars or on the moon. That's where it's a little bit more cost advantageous compared to you can't transport fossil fuels to the moon or to Mars, or that would be cost prohibitive anyway. There are some places where there's already a cost benefit to using a high energy density and portable power source like nuclear. There are a lot of people that are doing things like that. There are a lot of companies out there that are developing microreactors and small modular reactors that are going to be able to utilize nuclear energy in places where we never thought we could before.
And then how much of a key player AI is going to be in figuring out these missing links for the future of energy?
Well, I think AI is going to be critical, right? Because it can respond faster. You can respond to things much faster than you can with people. You can utilize data much more efficiently, and I would say there's a lot of AI already being used in the space industry, right? To be able to accomplish some of the things that have been accomplished, especially in the last year or so, the last 2 years, requires more specialized computer control of things than really what you can accomplish with people without AI. AI is going to be a critical piece to the space industry and to several other industries, especially in how you classify things, especially in the direction that you're able to innovate to deploy some of these newer technologies as well.
When we're talking about rocket fuels. So Blue Origin uses a liquid hydrogen as propellant, but the New Glenn uses liquid methane. So is there like kind of a limit? Like methane actually can deliver more than liquid oxygen, or what's the big difference between the two?
So, in all of the cases, you have a hydrogen or hydrocarbon propellant that you combine with liquid oxygen. So, liquid oxygen is always there, because in order to get the combustion, you need to combine oxygen with your hydrogen or your hydrocarbon. People used to use hydrogen, but hydrogen is not very good for reusable rockets because it burns very hot, and hydrogen is very difficult to handle. It embrittles metals, does a lot of things that make it difficult to reuse a rocket after you've launched something with hydrogen. So that's why a lot of companies are pivoting to using. I mean, RP1 has been used for a very long time, but RP1 you can reuse a rocket that's launched with RP1, and methane is even better in a lot of cases, cryogenic liquid methane. So that's why a lot of rocket companies are angling toward using these methane-based rocket engines. It burns a lot cooler so that the equipment can be reused.
So that would explain New Shepard, their smaller rocket, which uses liquid hydrogen, but then New Glenn, which is their heavy lift orbital rocket, it's going to be powered by 7 BE4 engines that use liquid methane and LOX.
Yeah, liquid methane and LOX is much better for reusable rockets. If you're using hydrogen, you're going to embrittle the rocket, you're going to limit its reusability. The big play for all these companies, all of the reusable launch companies, is to get the cost down. So if you limit your reusability, then your cost is going to start going up, and that defeats the purpose of reusable rockets.
Which is part of the dilemma, right? Even with space debris, like a lot of people are like, space debris is there, we need to fix it. But to fix it, you actually have to have easier access and go there more often so that you can create an economy of fixing the problem. If you don't, then you don't have any solutions.
Well, the good news is we have a lot of space up there, so no pun intended. The debris problem is one that we have to be cognizant of, but it's not a huge, I don't see it as big a problem today, provided we continue to manage, what's in low Earth orbit effectively. I think they call it the technosphere, which is a cool name.
Steph, with your journey of firefighting, chemistry, taking energy from air, now you're going into this secret project. What would be Steph's 3 words of wisdom?
I just have 2 words of wisdom. Be resilient. These companies are not easy to stand up, especially when you're trying to develop new hardware. Look at how many times SpaceX has had rockets blow up. You're going to have rockets blow up, whether you're making rockets or not. I think that the most important thing is to be resilient as you walk through a lot of these challenges. Changing the world isn't supposed to be easy. If it was easy, it would already be changed.
Same thing for life in general. If it's too easy, then it's not worth, or there's no transformation, right? The inherent process of transformation is challenging by nature because it demands that you go out into the unknown or the uncertainty. Like even the cell of a muscle, to grow stronger has to basically destroy itself so it can rebuild itself. So I do this presentation where I talk about the power of transformation using the metaphor of the butterfly and the snake shedding its skin. And we're always quick to use these two metaphors to say, become your own butterfly or renew yourself. What we forget in that story is how that process happens, right? When the caterpillar decides to transform, first of all, it has to accumulate all this energy. It just eats. then it has to isolate itself and creates an environment where it can actually transform. And then it unbecomes what it was to recreate itself. And even when it's fully into a butterfly, it has to spend that energy to come out of that cocoon. And they've discovered that when they actually cut that cocoon so that the butterfly comes out easier, these butterflies become less resilient and will die faster. So that struggle of coming out is part of becoming resilient. And then the other metaphor, the snake, when the snake is ready to shed that skin, it's not by lounging in the grass or by taking a swim, the old mantle comes away. It seeks the thorny bushes and the rocky edges. These are the places that can take away the old mantle.
Absolutely. To make muscles stronger, they have to get torn apart.
Exactly. So, Saf, I can't wait to see what you and your team are working on now. Secrecy, we know nothing about. We have an idea. We'll be watching with anticipation. I think everything that you've been working on so far has been fascinating. So I can only imagine your next chapter.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.